Uncle Junior Soprano remains one of television's great case studies in misplaced talent. A man who possessed the instincts of a master consiliary, yet insisted, against all available evidence, on occupying the big chair designed for someone far less fragile than he was. His brilliance always appeared most clearly in moments when he had no power at all, when the burdens of command were stripped away and his only responsibility was whispering wisdom, often disappointingly accurate wisdom, into the ear of the nephew he spent half his life resenting. Watching him dissect Richie April's harebrained coup attempt reveals a mind better suited to strategy than leadership. One look at Richie's bungled pitch to the Baris brothers, and Junior instantly understood the enterprise was finished. He couldn't sell it, he observed with the clinical detachment of a surgeon declaring a patient dead on arrival, and even the perpetually stunned Bobby Bacala found himself in awe of this sudden burst of lucidity. Junior's failure as a boss never derived from a lack of intelligence or insight. The man was littered with gems of advice that Tony used more often than he ever admitted. The failure lay in Junior's inability to project the kind of authority that others instinctively respect. His colleagues seemed to sense the desperation humming beneath his surface, the insecure longing for recognition that clung to him like cologne from another decade. Pride amplified the problem, transforming ordinary sensitivities into toxic vulnerabilities. In another world, specifically one where he could tolerate occupying a role beneath the throne, Junior would have made a superb consiliary. He had a rare ability to see the heart of a problem before anyone else realized there was one, coupled with the foresight of someone who had survived long enough to understand the difference between impulse and strategy. If he had ever freed himself from the need to be perceived as something grand, he could have been indispensable. His nephew certainly treated him that way, repeatedly seeking his counsel until dementia eroded one of the few stabilizing forces in Tony's life. The irony is that Tony, a man allergic to vulnerability, came closer to open emotional dependence with his uncle than with any of his many paid professionals. Even his crude quips and blustering bravado couldn't hide the truth. For all his posturing, Junior often served as the only adult in Tony's psychological room. Junior himself once gave a surprisingly elegant metaphor for leadership: steering the ship as best one can, accepting the smooth waters and the rocks alike, taking small pleasures where they can be seized. It was the kind of philosophy that, in theory, positioned him as the perfect second in command, a man who could balance tradition, pragmatism, and calculation without losing himself in the vanity of absolute power. But theory crumbled under the weight of his insecurities. In Season 1, he looked like a relic pretending to run a modern operation, reacting emotionally to slights real and imagined, quickly folding whenever Tony offered him even the faintest illusion of control. Others indulged him the way one humors a grandparent who insists on telling the same story for the 300th time. The infamous tax sit-down, in which his colleagues essentially staged a theatrical performance to let him believe he had influence, stands as an almost tragicomic display of how little gravitas he actually commanded. Yet once placed under house arrest, with the title of boss stripped of its ceremonial glamour and none of the pressures of leading a fractious organization, he transformed into the consiliary he never admitted he was. Freed from the weight of proving himself, he became a laser-focused strategist. He saw through Richie's unstable ambition long before Tony grasped its volatility, displaying a clarity that could only come from observing the game without wanting to be its champion. He understood the dangers of impulsivity, often serving as the counterweight to Tony's over-emotional decision-making. Even early hints of this appeared when he had to rein in Mikey Palmise, an eager consiliary in title but not in temperament, whose instinct was always to escalate matters with gratuitous violence. Junior leveled him like a weary father correcting a child who has confused aggression with competence. Of course, Junior's pride made him constitutionally incapable of accepting any position beneath boss, but fate, never a respecter of fragile egos, placed him exactly where he functioned best, behind the scenes, behind the curtain, behind his nephew's theatrics. The series itself made the miseries of leadership abundantly clear. Every boss was either consumed by stress or delusion, often both. Silvio, a competent administrator but not a strategist, nearly collapsed under the weight of command during Tony's coma, confirming what he had already admitted. He was born to be the man behind the throne, not on it. Carmine Jr. proved that the only path to happiness was relinquishing ambition entirely, and Carmine Sr. might have been the only Don who seemed to understand that the point of power was enjoying life, not dying from it. Jr., ever the old-school traditionalist, once even dressed up for a telephone sit-down, as though respectability could be transmitted through a telephone wire. He spoke in quotable aphorisms, wielding malapropisms with an earnest confidence that managed to be both hilarious and oddly profound. Yet despite his comedic quirks, he possessed a genuine capacity for strategic manipulation, subtly sowing discord among others to secure his own position. He could dissect motivations, anticipate betrayals, and navigate interpersonal landmines with the kind of precision that made him far more dangerous as an advisor than as a leader. His remarks during the Richie April debacle, particularly his speculation about where Tony's sister fit into the scheme, reveal a man who saw the emotional undercurrents others ignored. His predictions often landed squarely on target, including his suspicion that Janice, wielding manipulation like a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel, would inevitably stir chaos. Tony himself briefly suspected that he might be walking into an ambush when Janice called him to the house, a moment that becomes newly illuminating when viewed through Junior's warnings rather than audience omniscience. Junior's insights only sharpened as his official power waned. Confronted with the burdens of trial, legal bills, and a defense strategy he barely understood, he became an almost tragic figure, still sharp enough to comment on his attorney's phone charges while barely grasping the enormity of the federal case looming over him. His brilliance was never consistent, even before dementia, but when clarity struck, it was devastatingly clear. And yet, despite his strategic talent, he was also an emotional screwball. He could see the flaws in others while remaining blind to his own. His inability to interpret Tony's initial offer of the boss title as anything other than a triumph was emblematic. His ego prevented him from realizing he was being elevated as a lightning rod, not as a leader. Livia steered him with casual ease, manipulating him with the precision of someone tuning a radio. Junior's resentment toward Tony stemmed partly from this humiliation, partly from lifelong jealousy, and partly from the painful fact that Tony embodied everything Junior wanted to be, but never could. Respected, charismatic, easy in his authority, surrounded by people who gravitated toward him rather than tolerated him. Their relationship was a tempest built from shared history, buried affection, and unspoken bitterness. Tony asked him once why the things he repeated had to be so cruel, why he couldn't choose something kind. When Tony finally broke through the evasions and asked whether his uncle loved him, Junior couldn't look him in the eye. Some see this as proof of emotional limitation. Others recognize in it the dawning awareness that dementia was stealing his mind. Either interpretation underscores the tragedy of a man who finally outlived everyone but lost himself in the process. His famous boasts about being the cunt hair separating Tony from absolute dominion were both laughable and revealing. They captured his simultaneous pride and insecurity, his need to assert significance even when the world had moved on without him. His malapropisms became legendary, sometimes hilarious, sometimes scathing, always unforgettable. He could dismiss rivals with lines that deserved to be etched into some twisted marble monument to mob eccentricity. But beneath the humor lay a man who lasted longer than almost everyone else, not because he was powerful, but because he understood how to disappear until needed. Junior's biggest flaw was always himself. His ego made him ill-suited to formal leadership, but his mind, when unburdened by self-presentation, was sharp enough to influence major decisions with near-clinical precision. He lived long enough to become the organization's unofficial historian, its accidental elder statesman, its reluctant but effective backroom strategist. His legacy as an unofficial consiliary is stronger than anything he achieved during his brief, ceremonial reign as boss. Once removed from the spotlight, he became a rare asset Tony could trust to deliver unfiltered truth, sometimes harsh, often inconvenient, but usually correct. Silvio may have been a steady administrator, someone capable of delivering Tony's orders with a veneer of diplomacy, but he never possessed the commanding strategic intuition Junior displayed when his pride wasn't clouding his senses. Junior could tell Tony what he needed to hear without fearing the consequences. Sil had to worry about maintaining his placidity within the hierarchy. Tony, always more perceptive than he pretended, used both men wisely, carving out roles that suited their psychological architecture. Junior was a strategist who lacked charisma. Silvio was a loyalist who lacked vision. Together, they filled the leadership gaps Tony refused to acknowledge in himself. Junior resembled many such archetypes in literature and history: shrewd second sons, dutiful lieutenants, men of calculation rather than command. He shared the tragic dignity of characters like Stannis Baratheon, unyielding, principled in odd ways, capable of great insight, yet undermined by the fatal flaw of needing recognition. Even his interactions with Dr. Melfi by proxy, through Tony's therapy-influenced decisions, reveal how often Junior's words echoed in Tony's mind. Despite decades of friction, Junior remained one of the few whose counsel shaped Tony's worldview. His long years of survival, his adaptability, his unexpected emotional complexity, his blend of screwball eccentricity and genuine wisdom, all combined to make him one of the series' most compelling figures. He was never meant to run North Jersey, but he was born to whisper in the ear of the man who did. And though dementia eventually robbed him of everything, the echoes of his influence never disappeared. He lived long enough to become a ghost haunting a family he once guided, a relic of old-school principles, a reminder of the fine line between aspiration and delusion. In the end, his story became a cautionary tale. Some men are built to lead from the shadows, not from the stage. Junior Soprano was one such man, an accidental consiliary, a failed boss, a brilliant strategist, a tragic egomaniac, a survivor, a screwball sage whose greatest contributions emerged only when he stopped trying to be something more than the role he was born to play. Subscribe.